Nightmares are not random flashes of fear. They are not just broken sleep or strange accidents of the brain. They are the mind's way of speaking when it can no longer speak politely. In waking life, we edit ourselves constantly. We soften what hurts. We delay what terrifies us. We tell stories that make our pain easier to carry. But at night, the mask weakens. The rehearsed explanations fall away, and something deeper begins to push upward. A nightmare is what happens when a buried conflict refuses to stay buried. It arrives as a scene, a symbol, a chase, a collapse, a monster, a door that will not open, a voice that cannot be heard, a room that is too small, a body that cannot move. The nightmare does not merely frighten us, it organizes fear into form. It gives shape to what the waking mind has left vague. That is why nightmares feel so personal, even when they appear strange. They are not just about what is outside us, they are often about what has become unbearable inside us. The unconscious does not usually send an email, it sends an image, and the image tends to arrive at the exact moment when the ego has become too confident, too distracted, or too numb to notice the damage building below the surface. This is why nightmares are so disturbing. They interrupt the fantasy that everything is under control. They remind us that the mind is not a closed system, and that what we suppress does not disappear. It gathers weight. It collects voltage. It waits. The body knows this before the intellect does. Sleep is not a blank shutdown. It is a highly active process, a kind of nightly negotiation between consciousness and everything consciousness would rather ignore. In one stage, we drift. In another, we descend. In another, the dreaming mind becomes vivid while the body is held still. This stillness is protective, but it can also become terrifying when the dream contents turn hostile. The brain is alive, the body is quiet, and the person is trapped somewhere between image and paralysis. That is why nightmares and sleep paralysis feel so ancient. They are not only biological events, they feel like encounters. The chest is heavy, the air is thin, the room feels inhabited. The mind reaches for explanation, but explanation is too slow. Fear arrives first, then interpretation follows, often badly. Throughout history, people have given this experience many names: demons, spirits, hags, invaders, watchers. The names change, but the structure remains strikingly similar. Something unseen presses in. Something uninvited crosses the threshold. Something in us experiences the night as hostile territory. Psychologically, that hostility often becomes visible when the person is under strain. Stress, grief, shame, conflict, guilt, exhaustion, trauma, all of these increase the pressure inside the system. The dream then becomes a pressure valve. That does not make the experience pleasant, it makes it meaningful. The nightmare is often the psyche's emergency signal, a crude but effective way of saying, look here, this is not resolved. There is tension here that daylight has not touched. There is a wound here that your waking life keeps walking around. And when people repeatedly wake from the same image, or the same pursuit, or the same collapse, it is often because the mind is insisting on a confrontation the person keeps postponing. The recurrence is the point. The repetition is the message. The psyche repeats what consciousness refuses to hear. Some nightmares are simply the shadow in motion. They are the parts of ourselves we would rather not own: rage, helplessness, grief, envy, hunger, need, desire, shame, cruelty, vulnerability. These qualities do not vanish because we reject them. They go underground and return in symbolic dress. The shadow rarely appears to us as, I am your disowned anger. It appears as a stranger, a predator, a faceless crowd, a broken child, a thief, a judge, a collapsing house, a body that decays, a creature that stares from the dark. The form is chosen to match the emotion, and if we meet the figure directly, something strange often happens. The monster changes. The pursuer speaks. The beast is less monstrous than expected. The dream reveals that what we feared as pure evil was often a fragmented part of the self asking to be acknowledged. This is one reason nightmares can be painful but ultimately healing. They do not only terrify, they reveal one-sidedness. They force the person to see where life has become too narrow, too controlled, too sanitized. The person who dreams of being hunted may be running from truth. The person who dreams of falling may be losing losing footing in some area of life that the conscious mind refuses to admit. The person who dreams of being trapped may already be living a trapped existence in waking hours, but with enough distraction to keep it hidden. Nightmares expose the cost of repression. They reveal how much energy is spent maintaining the image of being fine, and they also remind us that the psyche wants wholeness, not performance. It wants integration, not perfection. That is why confrontation matters, not violence, confrontation. To turn and face what is chasing us, to ask what it wants, to stop treating every dark image as an enemy and begin treating some of them as messengers. Sometimes the nightmare is not saying you are doomed. Sometimes it is saying you have been avoiding something crucial for too long. The dark figure is not always there to destroy you. Sometimes it is there to return you to yourself. And this is where the response begins, not by trying to erase the nightmare as quickly as possible, as if fear itself were the problem. The deeper move is to engage it, to write it down, to remember its details, to sit with the image long enough for it to become more than a blur of terror, to ask what in waking life resembles its structure, to notice the emotional residue it leaves behind, to pay attention to what has been unspoken, ungrieved, unaccepted. Some people use dream journaling, some use active imagination, some use lucid dreaming, some simply begin by not looking away. The point is not to dominate the unconscious. The point is to enter a relationship with it, because the psyche is not healed by force, only by contact, and contact requires courage. It requires the willingness to discover that the thing haunting you is not always external. Sometimes it is a memory, sometimes it is a fear, sometimes it is an unlived life. Sometimes it is the part of you that was exiled so early that it learned to return only in the night. When that happens, the nightmare becomes a threshold, not a punishment, but a gate. Cross it badly and fear rules the night again. Cross it well and the image begins to change. The room opens, the shadow speaks, the monster softens, the body wakes with less dread and more understanding. And perhaps that is the real psychology of nightmares. They are not proof that the mind is broken. They are proof that the mind is trying, in the only language it fully owns in sleep, to push us back toward truth. But there is another layer to nightmares that makes them even stranger. Sometimes they do not only reveal what is repressed, they reveal what is missing. A nightmare can expose the absence of safety, the absence of trust, the absence of a life that feels inhabited rather than merely survived. In that sense, the dream is not only pointing to pain, it is also pointing to a direction. It shows the psyche where wholeness has been interrupted, where fear has taken the place of contact, where life has become too controlled or too numb to breathe. And when that happens, the nightmare becomes a demand, not to panic, not to escape, but to respond, to change something in waking life so the same darkness does not have to return every night wearing a different face. A nightmare can also become a teacher of boundaries. It shows where the psyche has no defense, where life has gone too far, where something inside has been overrun for too long. That is why the same dream can return again and again, until it is answered. Not answered with a clever interpretation alone, but with a real change in the way a person lives, feels, or protects themselves. The dream insists on a response, because the unconscious does not care about our excuses. It cares about balance. It cares about what has been ignored. And when the ignored finally enters awareness, the nightmare loses some of its power, because it is no longer carrying the burden alone.